So first of all, just a little bit about my background, for the past 13 years I was the CFO and treasurer at Viewpoint School, an independent K-12 in California. And before that, I worked in higher education at UCLA as a program and business manager. And at the same time I was at UCLA, I also helped start another independent school, a K-8 school called the Wesley School. And I was the volunteer strategic planning and finance person to help start that school. But I also have some background in admissions. I was an enrollment management consultant for schools including MIT and Georgetown, working with a software program that helps support outreach and marketing for admissions offices at universities, and also worked in admissions and marketing positions at a couple of universities, Chapman University and Westminster College, and have taught as well. Taught marketing, business plan development, economics, places like UCLA, and have background in business with an MBA. But what's been interesting is that just a few months ago, I kind of stepped aside from my full-time position at Viewpoint, where I continue as a consultant, to start a broader consultancy to work with schools across the country in helping them deal with some of the same issues that we dealt with at Viewpoint School. And those were first highlighted in a session I did at the NBOA conference in Philadelphia last February, and which were also covered in an article I wrote for the National Business Officer magazine that was published in May and June, and also that session was covered quite a bit in the SSATB summer issue of Memoranda. And I really just wanted to thank SSATB, for Heather Hurley and Karen for the opportunity to share this information directly with the membership today. And as you saw, that admissions people really have a soft spot in my heart, and you'll learn a little bit more about why as we go on as well. So mostly what kind of like the goals that I work with and that we'll hopefully discuss today is the goal that schools have to really promote enrollment and budget sustainability and in an increasingly dynamic marketplace. And that one way that we get to that is really by developing a competitive marketing model that includes a market-informed outreach plan and a realistic enrollment strategy that's based on that market information, as well as competitive tuition setting that takes into account the competitive environment that the school's in, not just the costs recovery that is necessary to cover the cost of programming. And then also looking at how financial aid comes into play for kind of what we talk about in a business office as net tuition, or kind of the idea of variable pricing. The economist in me would call that discriminatory pricing, where everyone pays kind of what the price that they are willing and able to pay. And we see that all the time on airlines, where last-minute business traveler will pay 3 times for the same ticket as someone who's planning a vacation well in advance. And increasingly, we have kind of a Groupon mentality almost with financial aid and some of our parents. So we'll discuss that a little bit. That the goals of this specific presentation, though, are really to kind of review the big picture of demographic data and market trends, and also to look at it, that information through the lens of a case study, and how an admission director and CFO work together to kind of begin a process with self-assessment of issues at the school or the market realities, and basically a look in the mirror, and then also mining the available data at the school and analyzing that, as well as constructing a model of what the competitive landscape looked like. So we'll look at how that was done through a case study, and also how that information helped to define value propositions not for the school as a whole only, but at every entry grade. So for those of you who have multiple entry grades, we'll look at how it differs depending on which entry grade you're at. And also look at the role of primary local demographic research. But before we get to that, I want to kind of like look at big picture of what our world looks like increasingly. And this is something that we often call disrupted business models. And so this is, stop us if you've heard this story before, as you look at some of these different examples that you spot these different businesses that over the last 20 years have gone through some significant disruption in their business model. It's not that they're not still thriving and existing. The record companies are still around, the phone utilities are still around, but their business models have changed dramatically, and that the successful people who remain in the sectors had to adapt while a number of their former competitors kind of left the stage. And so it begs the question that in this world where technology and other factors are disrupting people's business models, what's next? And this is an interesting slide that I got actually from an investment firm, Motley Fool. I think they were going to propose that the broadcast national television networks are next, and that their lunch is going to be eaten by the likes of Netflix and Amazon.com distributing original entertainment. But I'd like to propose maybe the traditional school business model is next, that there's a good chance that what we have known for actually centuries as a business model could be in for some big change, and we'll look at maybe some of the drivers behind those changes. And they would include demographic shifts that we'll talk about today, and also stagnant incomes for a majority of the population in the U.S. Incomes have been pretty stagnant, and in some quadrants even fallen in an inflation-adjusted way. And then also that there are all these new low-cost alternatives that have come up on the scene, whether they're charter schools that provide a lot of opportunity for parent involvement and enhanced non-state controlled or at least directed curriculum, but basically for free or for the price of donation. Online courses have gotten much more into play, and then also homeschooling has picked up, and that has broadened its audience. The people who are interested in homeschooling have changed compared to where the people who were interested in that maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And part of that is this next point here, a psychographic shift in the marketplace, where the people who are currently parents of elementary school students grew up in the 70s. That they're the latchkey kids of the 70s, that first generation where maybe both parents were working and the kids would come home and be on their own, and that in response to kind of that upbringing, that they are kind of moving to the other extreme to be the Uber helicopter parents and wanting to be more and more involved in every aspect of their children's education, to the point that many of them, even very highly educated parents, are wanting to be involved to the point where they're adopting homeschooling, especially in elementary grades for their kids, figuring that maybe they know best and wanting to be more involved in their children's education at those early educational grade levels. And then also, one of the main reasons why people would be willing to pay for fantastic independent school education is to help prepare their children for college. And in this environment now, people are starting to re-examine the value and the cost of a college education and a college degree. Not that they're dropping the interest in that completely, but that that more people are really kind of like looking at the value proposition in a college degree, especially given the amount of debt that a number of students are taking on to be able to pursue their higher education, and that impacts the overall view of the college prep education that independent schools offer. So how does this all shake out? And basically, I would suppose or propose that more than 10% of private schools are going to close their doors or be forced to merge with another school in the next 5 years, based on especially the current demographic trends. And again, the economist in me uses a term called ceteris paribus, as long as all other things are held constant. Things can change moving forward that might change that prediction to lessen the impact or make it even more significant. But that there's certainly indicators that there will be less demand for independent school education moving forward. So first of all, we're going to talk about demographics. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, it's just it's a statistical data about a population. I like the second definition a little bit better because it talks about it's especially with regard to the capacity for expansion and decline. That recognizing that the demographics of a population are constantly in flux and change over time. And anyone who pays attention to headlines online or in print sees that things are changing, that the population is changing around the world, in Europe, in Asia, and the U.S. as well. And so that's where I had come up with this idea that really we're playing a game of reverse musical chairs, that every year that the enrollment music stops, there are fewer students to fill the same number of school desks in our schools across the country, and that impacts our competitive environment quite a bit. And it comes down to a simple truth that children can't come to your school if they weren't born. We have a declining fertility rate, and this slide looks at in the world as a whole. That by the middle of the century, about 2050, that we'll probably get worldwide to a place where the population stops growing significantly, that will basically be to a replacement rate of 2 children per woman born worldwide. It's still, population is still growing, and our population is projected that maybe by that time would get to 9 billion across the world. But that is certainly not the case in all Western and developed countries. In the United States specifically, that the birth rate has fallen, that depending on the study that you look at, it's somewhere between 1.89 and 1.91 births per woman in the U.S. And that big news that was trumpeted a couple months ago was that the decline in the birth rate in the U.S. Finally flatlined, and so that the supposed good news was that the approximate 1.9 births per woman in 2012 had not dropped further than where it had been in 2011. But that since the replacement rate is about 2.1, that really, without immigration, the U.S. is shrinking as a population when it comes to fertility rate. So it's an important thing to kind of factor in, and especially for those of our schools that are focused on kindergarten, this is this declining fertility rate is felt pretty soon after birth. And it's not just that people are unable to have kids. I mean, people are waiting longer to get married. People are increasingly deciding not to get married at all. And sometimes people are getting married and just choosing not to have children because there are limits to what people can afford, and that you can certainly, maybe have a more luxurious, exciting life if you don't have the financial responsibilities and time responsibilities of a family. And so this magazine cover from a couple months ago on Time had this great detailed article about some of the psychological changes that are also kind of behind the demographics. And colleges are facing these same challenges as well. That just a couple weeks ago there was a front page headline on the Chronicle of Higher Education about the uncertainty of college admissions, and that nearly half of small colleges failed to meet their enrollment goals, either the financial revenue goal or the enrollment headcount for the class entering in the fall of 2011, or excuse me, 2013. And so that's significant that it's not just our K-12 environment, but also universities are kind of starting to reel from some of these same issues. And that they've spent a lot of time actually studying this. That there's a recent study looked at high school graduation rates between 2008-9 and 2019-20. So during this coming decade that we're kind of at the beginning part of, that their high school graduation is looking to decline in most states across the country. If your school happens to be in Utah, Colorado, or Texas, congratulations, you're in a high growth area. A couple of those other tan states also have a growing high school graduation rate, but that most states in the country are having some declines on the horizon. And especially some of those states in the Midwest and New England, where we have a high concentration of independent schools, that some of those are experiencing some of the steepest declines. And so at the bottom of this slide, it says the source of that information is a study called Knocking 2012 by the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, and really looking at declines in the U.S. as a whole, down about 2%. Not too big of a deal. But certain regions, as I mentioned, with the Midwest and New England having a bigger drop, and that there's some states that have very significant declines in the projected high school graduation rates. Looking at some of these statistics, that again with New England and some of the Midwest states. And again, though, it's not for every school. Just because a trend is across the board for a state doesn't mean that every school. I'm talking to a school in Massachusetts that's having a surge in enrollment, but it specializes in a certain type of student, and that so their mission is serving a student that's not well served by the majority of schools in the Boston suburb area that is their target market. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your school will have an issue, but that there's just fewer students that will be around to fill seats significantly in some of our states. In my home state of California, it's significant that this graph kind of shows the projection of high school grads. And for any of you who had a friend or family member who was applying to go to college in 2010 or 11, I don't have to tell you that was one of the most competitive years in college admissions. That there were more high school graduates in that time period than basically in history, and so getting into college was very difficult. But that because of the birth rate 18 years earlier than that, and other factors, that the high school graduation rate has really fallen off since then, and starting to level off now in 2013, but then precipitously dropping again in the future. When you look at the statistics here from about 2024, there's another big drop on the way. What makes that interesting, I mean, for colleges, they can use this data to prepare for what to look for 12, 13 years from now, but that for those of us who are trying to fill seats in kindergarten, that high school graduating class of 2024 is entering right now. And that so for many of you, I don't have to tell you that applications are down for kindergarten, or that there are fewer potential families, because you can see that when you look at your own admission pool. So where does this leave us, as private schools? Are we in a world where it's kind of the survival of the fittest? Is there, increased competitive pricing that we can do, whether it's use of financial aid or other tools on pricing to try to make independent schools more attractive? Do we need to adapt our mission somehow and start to try to specialize or serve a different or broader group? Certainly, that some single-gender schools have looked at, becoming co-ed, and that'd be an example of that. But all of these things lead us to ask the question, is our school sustainable? And so I want to get into a case study that kind of like starts with that question, but maybe pause for a quick minute just to see if there's any questions on kind of the basic demographic information that we've covered so far. Karen, do you have any questions?
We do not have any questions at this point in time, so feel free to keep moving, Chad.
Fantastic. Well, and we'll stop again in a bit to see. So to help kind of like look at how one school might have dealt with these kind of issues, I'll use a case study from my own school, that Viewpoint School. And as a little background, it's a K-12 school, it's a little over 50 years old, located in suburban Los Angeles, town of Calabasas. In grades K through 12, enrolls just over 1,200 students, and the high school tuition is a little over $30,000 a year. So it's on the larger side for independent schools, but a successful and established school here in Los Angeles. And that the heart of the case study is really kind of explores the collaboration between a CFO and an admissions director, and how the two of them work together and involved others at their school to help look at some of these issues. And this is where I have to have a point for full disclosure, is that I was the CFO in this case, but also the admission director at Viewpoint was and is my wife, Laurel Baker, too. So we had a special relationship. I said that I had a soft spot in my heart for admission work, and so you can tell that that's long-standing. So my wife Laurel and I, we would talk about admission challenges and how that might affect the budget, as a course of our business relationship, but also in, at home sometimes, or in the car, and really kind of like started to look at that in more detail, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, where we began, when I began actually, as encouraged by our board finance committee to broaden our budgeting, so that we were looking at a 5-year budget projection, and that involved having to look at where we thought enrollment was going to be and tuition revenue would be in the coming 5 years. And it's certainly coming out of 2008 and 9. This is an important question, and you can't just kind of project what you hope things will be. You have to use the information that you have to make your best assumptions. And so, and this process was really kind of informed by college enrollment planning. That Laurel had worked for many years in college enrollment, and as you saw from my bio, so had I. And so some of the tools that we had experienced in the college admissions world, we brought to bear in helping to analyze the situation in our independent school. And projections started with a detailed history review about where we had been as a school, what admissions had looked like, what financial aid had looked like, and what our market was looking like. And we kind of drew on existing research about the local population, and that actually got to a point where when we had continuing questions, we commissioned some primary demographic research on certain target markets that the school was working with, so we could better understand the detailed markets. So we will look at that information as we go through this case study. And kind of this conversation and discussion of what we were working on with our colleagues at school led to the creation of an ad hoc tuition sustainability task force with the Board of Trustees. It was mostly groups from people interested in finance and strategic planning committees on the board. And I've got to point out that this wasn't really born out of crisis, that Viewpoint had been fortunate that enrollment had remained strong during the Great Recession. We'd had a lot more churn in families, people who had to leave the school, often for financial reasons, but that because of our market position, we had been able to replace lost families with other interested families, and also use some of this information that I'm going to be sharing with you to help broaden our market outreach, and that also helped keep enrollment robust even during the downturn in the economy. But we really had to ask, are historical tuition and expense increases sustainable? That Viewpoint had been raising tuition 6 to 7% during much of the early 2000s, as many schools had in California at least. And we had gotten to a point that we're really examining tuition sustainability and whether or not that was going to be sustainable moving forward, and what other threats there might be to financial sustainability given the fact that we were living through one of the biggest downturns since the Depression. So first of all, we looked at kind of historical projections of where we had been regarding tuition at Viewpoint, and looked at, since the early 90s, that this average of 6 or 7% tuition increases had basically more than doubled the cost of attending our school. So that, and that was not a surprise necessarily to our families who had come in at kindergarten, and that by the time their student was graduating, tuition had gone from $13,000 or so to close to $30,000 a year at the time we were doing this analysis, and so that more than doubled or doubled during the course of their 13 years at the school. And so we applied some of those same metrics and looked at the fact that, well, if we continued on that course, what would it look like? And basically, it at 6 or 7% increases moving forward, tuition would again more than double for the entering kindergartners and reach over $60,000 a year, which was viewed as being not sustainable. Although it's important to kind of like have a quick caveat that tuition increase rates in and of themselves are not necessarily problematic. What's really important is nominal versus separating nominal from real. Nominal tuition rates could be anything. I mean, a 7% tuition increase rate is fine if inflation and wages are also going up 7%. Real tuition rate of increase is what's more important, which is nominal rate minus inflation. And so for so many people in school management who maybe started in the 80s, they remember a time when inflation was running high, and that just to keep pace with the rising costs of operating a school, that they had to increase tuition by 6, 7, 10% in some years just to be able to keep pace, and that as long as the inflation rate was growing at a similar pace, that it wasn't really causing a dent in affordability. What happened, though, is that schools continued to expand program and expense and raise tuition at 5, 6, 7% a year, even though inflation fell to 2 and 3% in the 2000s. And actually, In 2009, I think the inflation actually was negative. We had a deflationary year. So any increase that year would have been a real percentage increase. So it's important to kind of make that distinction. So the task force kind of like set out to look at several things to really review internal factors like our mission, our program variety, the quality and cost structure of the school, our unique marketplace, and then also to evaluate competing schools and their tuition prices, and review general market trends, and also then to gather demographic data. There was a suspicion that our area was kind of graying, that families had raised kids but were staying in their homes, so there wasn't a lot of turnover in housing stock, but that fewer homes in our area had kids of primary and secondary school age, and so that we were looking at that. And these are things that I think a number of you probably have also looked at, and hopefully that some of the detail that we looked at can help inform some of the programs that you're undergoing as you look at these issues. So first of all, we looked at what are these factors that are impacting our tuition. Why has it been raising? Well, we looked at competition. Was important. We would always look at what other schools were charging, and in the case of Viewpoint, actually the Viewpoint was a little bit below the competition, and so we had a little bit more of a cushion to be able to raise tuition and still not exceed what the competitive norm was. And also it's important to look at financial aid and that capacity to mitigate list price tuition. And certainly a portion of financial aid is mission-driven, that wanting to increase the economic diversity of your school, but increasingly financial aid is also a way to fill seats, and that there is a detailed and quantitative models that helps inform to financial aid discounting to find an optimal level of financial aid and variable pricing of tuition using financial aid. And then also looking at tiered tuition for those schools that have more than just one market segment. They'll often have a tuition for primary school and for middle school and for upper school, and so where do those tuitions lie competitively? It's an important part of the discussion. And building reserves is also important. As you go through a big downturn, you realize that the ability to combat future challenges the school might face is important to have reserves on hand. So whether it's a Superstorm Sandy or an earthquake, or it could be a demographic emergency that the school has, or a downturn of a major employer in the community that goes belly up or decides to move their operation to another state, that building reserves is always an important element of school financial planning, and how you build those reserves goes into your tuition as well, and looking at strategic factors as well, how you're what's important to your school. Are you growing, stable, or changing in some way? So for Viewpoint, our enrollment pipeline really over 12 grades had at least 3 major entry points. Certainly that students came in at kindergarten, and that was the major entry point for the school. But as you can look at this kind of pipeline diagram, you see the school grows significantly in middle school. So at 6th grade is a second entry point, where a lot of public school students who in California go from kindergarten through 5th grade at their local public school might then change schools as they enter 6th grade, and that a number of parents might have felt comfortable with the local elementary public school down the street and had their children attend the public school at that point, but then when they hit 5th grade and they started to look at the public middle schools, they weren't as comfortable with that option, and so there's a spike of interest in, so Viewpoint would open up some additional seats at 6th grade. And then also again at 7th grade, because there were a number of schools, independent private schools, that would go through 6th grade. And so that 7th grade was a big year for students to be applying out of primary schools or elementary schools to middle and upper schools. And so for Viewpoint, both 6th and then again 7th grade were entry grade levels, but the population was different. And then again for high school at 9th grade was another entry point where the school grew yet again. So what was important though in looking at this is to realize that you didn't have, at least in our case, just one population or target market. That each entry point, whether it be kindergarten, 6th grade, 7th grade, or 9th grade, they each had distinctive characteristics, and they each drew from a different type of population, both geographically and also experience-wise, especially for the 6th and 7th grade, where 6th graders' entries were not used to private schools at all. And the cost was a main issue for those parents, whereas people who were entering at 7th grade had been mostly at nonprofit private schools. Those parents were used to paying tuition. They were used to the high level of curriculum and expectation of a independent school, and so they needed less they needed less convincing about some of the value, and they were also already used to the tuition paying model. So that was an important, just understanding the difference between the entry level mindset at different grade levels was important. So our competitive analysis then kind of like launched with that understanding. We looked to evaluate competing schools and factors at each entry grade. So one of the things we found that was a surprise to some was that for kindergarten, that most of the competing grades or competing options were public schools and who charged no tuition. So really there was not very much price sensitivity for kindergarten, because the option was coming to a private school or the local public elementary school. But that changed at other grade levels. We also gathered and analyzed competition data and captured kind of like the total cost of attending a given school less financial aid. So it looked at what the net tuition basically was for different competing schools. Now it's important though when you're thinking about defining the competition, that so often we think about our peer schools, those schools that we feel that our school is most like. So in a lot of cases, those are other independent schools who share, qualities and program that is similar to our school. But when you're talking about, competitive analysis, what you really need to be looking at more is crossover schools, those schools where you cross applications or interest. And those are bounded mostly by geography, and they could include public schools and religious schools just as well as other independent schools. And understanding that difference has a really significant impact on how you analyze things, and also on the various entry grades that you're looking at. Certainly, students, at least in our experience, who were applying for 9th grade were willing to come from a much farther distance. They would jump on our bus system and come up to an hour to attend our school, whereas students coming to kindergarten, their parents were looking for a much more local alternative, so the geographic market was much tighter around our campus for kindergartners than it was for 9th graders. So, and we also looked at the net tuition and found, as you can see in this graph, that Viewpoint was a little below the tuition of peer crossover schools, and that difference was changing as we continue to raise prices at a little bit higher level than some of our competitors. What's interesting here is the red dotted line, which really shows that if Viewpoint had raised its tuition, and you could do this for your own school as well, and I think that the line would be just as stark, sometimes more, that if they had taken the tuition of, in this case, 1994, and only raised it based on the consumer price index, that's what the red dotted line indicates, that just the rate of inflation. So you can see how much more tuition increases have outpaced general inflation when you look at this information. So our competitor price analysis included looking at Viewpoint as price parity. We figured out we were basically at parity with other independent schools. Many of our peers had kind of like lowered their tuition increases, and so we had caught up with them. And also we figured the gap between Viewpoint and public or religious schools was really, too large to be concerned about. So price wasn't necessarily an issue that we could combat competition when it came to public or the parochial schools in our area. And then finally, we kind of looked at some general market trends. And in that period of the 90s up to 2007, about that there had been increase in concentration of wealth in our society, and so often people would argue that that's not a good thing for society as a whole, but for independent schools that might serve the top 10 or 20% of the community, that the concentration of wealth at the high end actually kind of benefits independent schools in quite a way. There had been a slow decline, at least in California, of some of the local public schools we had noted, and an increase in private school enrollment, so that the pie was expanding for private schools. There were more kids being born entering school, and also more kids were coming to private schools. The enrollment was increasing. Charitable giving was also increasing as people's incomes were growing, and that schools also had access to inexpensive tax-free municipal bond financing to help spur construction. So there was an arms race of sorts with schools improving their facilities to compete with one another and also draw more students to their schools. And during this time period, there were new schools were started, other schools expanded, and so it was kind of a heyday. That all ended, for the most part, in 2008, in the Great Recession. That wealth continued to be more concentrated, but that there was a decline continued in local public schools, but that didn't seem to impact private school enrollment because incomes were impacted by the recession. That there was flat private school enrollment overall. Some sectors of the country saw a decline in private school enrollment, spiking demand for financial aid, the charitable giving trailed off, and then also the ability to borrow funds in the financial markets to improve schools pretty much dried up. That in our target area, only one new school was started during that time, and a very limited expansion. And there was also several schools that closed their doors during the Great Recession, and others that merged. So some of the possible things when we look toward the future, as far as additional market changes, that there's really flat to slow growth in California's population, and certainly that's going to be the case in other areas of the country. There's uneven gains in wealth and employment, continued concentration of wealth in the country, and continued higher demand for financial aid because of that concentration of wealth. The full pay families will be more able to pay full, but that also that there's going to be more demand for financial aid for the families that are not in the top 10%. And the population as a whole is becoming more diverse. And some additional possible market changes, at least in California, with tax receipts, impacted by the recession, and then also by the pension fund demands for public employees. That there's a decline in public schools will probably continue, could accelerate, that there's flat and declining private school enrollment. Rapid growth in charter schools have really also impacted interest in private schools. And as we mentioned before, the interest in homeschooling, and then also technology is coming in as a big driver, which could be positive for our schools in some ways, but also create new hybrid models of schools and teaching that we don't fully understand yet, as the technology kind of improves with online courses. And so basically, what we've covered so far is just kind of evaluating competing schools and factors at every entry grade, the need to gather and analyze competitive pricing to capture costs of financial aid and really look at the net tuition, not just the gross list price tuition, and also to review changes in the competitive landscape was really important. And so the last little bit, I want to talk about some specific demographic research that can help inform, each local school. But I wanted to pause for a quick second and see if there's any questions at this point.
Chad, you're obviously doing a very thorough job. We do have a question from Linda. She's asking if you're aware of the percentage of decline in kindergarten applicants across the country.
That's a great question, Linda, and certainly one that people are interested in. That unfortunately I don't have overall data for that, and that also that's probably one of the most closely held secrets that admission offices, because you as admissions officers know that that it's so important to put on a good positive face, and you say like, oh, things are going great. We may have a few less kindergartners this year than we had before, but that it's great and this is exactly what we wanted. But that so getting that data is not always easy, especially this year and last year. That becomes a little bit more readily available on NAIS or other data gathering sources as we move forward, and so we'll get a better feel for that. But certainly I co-presented with John Chubb from NAIS just a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the declines in, he didn't have a specific percentage number, but declines in kindergarten enrollment across the country at NAIS schools. And so I know that it is an issue that we need to continue to work to quantify and to hopefully turn around. So finally, just want to kind of like look at some specifics about demographics on a local basis. We talked about like in a more global sense, but what does that mean to you and your school? And so from we start with kind of like broader data of that at Viewpoint we kind of examined unemployment data, and especially the unemployment for college educated and top income people, because those were our primary market. We also examined local median home prices over the last 10-15 years, and that was really a big issue. So many schools, or so many parents see independent school as a good that they want to aspire to. So they're aspirational buyers, and that they often don't necessarily have the earning power to afford our full pay tuition, but that they were able to tap into their home equity to make the dream happen for their kids. And that all turned around as housing prices fell in 2008. And even though a lot of housing prices have rebounded since then, that increasingly people are more cautious now about tapping home equity to pay for something like certainly a boat or a car, but even more independent school and college. That's where some of the surge in loan debt for college students has come from, that people are less likely to tap their home equity to help pay because it's uncertain. And then also we looked at home sales and to just better understand kind of the turnover rate in our area. And looked at population data that in Los Angeles So, I mean, in Southern California, it was going to grow at a very modest rate, and actually in Los Angeles County, the number of children was going to projected to be down by about 7%. And a study that compared 2000 and 2010 data actually showed that for those children at the youngest levels, that it was going to be even bigger declines, maybe up to 21%, depending on the area in Los Angeles County. Luckily, some of the most recent data I've looked at shows that in the wealthier areas that it is not dropping as much. It's still people who are those areas where income is lower, that those people are more likely to not have as many kids, or delay marriage, or delay having starting a family at all. And so that's kind of feeding into this very low projected number of new young children. And then also the income for top earning families is it's growing, and that's the good news, but it's not growing at the same rate that it had been prior to the recession. So what does this demographic profile mean for your student market and database? And so to kind of like look at that, let's look at as final example with Viewpoint School, that we looked at that it was going to take probably a $200,000 average household income for someone to be able to pay full price and not need financial aid to send one child to Viewpoint. And to send more than one child would be an income of about $50,000 a year more per child more. So, and since then we've looked at other cost data and found that number is probably a little low, but that we had to look at our demographic profile and say, well, if we know this about our what it costs to send a student for full price to Viewpoint, what does that look like? So we looked at households that had children, and only 50% of the households in our target market actually had children living in them. And then we also looked at what percentage of households in our target market had an income of $200,000 or more, and only about 7% of those total households had income of $200,000 or more. And you can imagine we're fortunate to be in an area where even 7% of the people had incomes of plus $200,000. That combining those two things together, there's roughly about only 3% of households that really were potential customers for Viewpoint. And we kind of graphed some of this data. We looked at the concentration in our area of high-earning households, and that found that there was actually quite a few, but the darkest purple areas here are those areas that have the highest income, and then the lighter purple have also significant income. That for those of you who know Los Angeles, you'll see some of those dark areas and as Beverly Hills and Brentwood and Bel Air and also Malibu. And then we also looked, though, at, well, this is where the wealthy people are living. Where are the wealthy people who have children living? And it was much smaller, that there are handfuls of people. We found things like, for example, in Beverly Hills, in the flats, the nicest area of Beverly Hills, or at least the traditional area that you're used to seeing on TV, with very wealthy people, but very few had kids. And it was more up in the hills where people had kids. Malibu had kids, and then by a chance of circumstance, that the people who founded Viewpoint School 55 years ago happened to put it in Calabasas, where that's one of the other areas of the dark purple areas where people happen to have high incomes and kids at the same time. So that this was detailed demographics we did. What we used this information to guide was we started to send improved bus service to some areas where we had not had significant number of families applying, places like Santa Monica and Beverly Hills and Brentwood. and we began to make the school, our school, more attractive because of that extended bus service to people in those areas, and that it made it increase the number of applications from those areas, and those buses are now mostly full. And so a lot of our growth and stability have been by using this data to figure out how we could improve outreach and serve some of the markets that based on this data. So just quickly, I know we're about out of time. I just want to quickly go through just a couple conclusions here with demographic data that stable and declining population of wealthy families with children. The household incomes are not projected to grow as fast as they had. Number of families with children are expected to drop in at least our core market area and many others across the country. That the growth of families in wealthy and affluent areas are growing, but more slowly, and also that schools are already, at least our school already had excellent penetration. We found as we did all of this research. So it's a few other conclusions that we wanted to update and build a competitive marketing plan based on this data, and that the insights and demographic research should help inform a market-informed outreach plan, which has been put together, and that strategic tuition setting was ramped up, and where we're becoming more informed about both gross and net tuition in making tuition decisions and also budgeting for financial aid. So some of the additional goals is looking for other ways to grow revenue. That maybe that summer programs could be renting out campus facilities for programs. That offering programs to the local community or adults that are not part of your normal or your past experience. And just kind of like trying to move the school maybe to be less dependent on tuition income by focusing on increasing the endowment so that tuition doesn't have to bear as large of a piece of the operating costs as it maybe currently does or has in the past. So I guess some of the questions are, what does this case study mean for your school? And can you make what can you make of these kind of like competitive and demographic information and the changing environment? One possibility is people kind of can come away looking at all of this and say, well, our old paradigm for schools was that we are all great educators and we love each other and we work side by side, and we're working to just offer wonderful education to kids in our community. But that only works as long as there are more than enough kids to fill all the seats in all of our schools. That as the empty seats multiply, then it, our independent school is going to turn into a much more of a cutthroat, competitive environment as it becomes survival of the fittest. And maybe, but not necessarily. One thing that people can look at is there's an old adage that it's not necessarily that you have to outrun this bear of competition and demographics. That like a hiker who's encounters a bear in the woods, that they only have to outrun their slowest hiking companion, not necessarily the bear. That again, colleges are dealing with these same things, and some of our our colleagues in colleges, they may be looking at things like the layoffs or eliminating low-interest programs, but more that they're looking to try and start new programs to attract students and putting more resources into marketing, doing more detailed and competitive analysis, and becoming more sophisticated about their marketing operations or their admissions outreach to try to combat these factors and improve their enrollment management operations. So in some ways, this information can help hopefully support an argument at your school and with your board for more resources for the admissions office, and why it's important to be able to invest in your good work and expand it. that certainly there's alternative school futures. Independent schools as a whole could actually, build market share and take a bigger slice of a declining pie from competing more maybe with public schools. That's can be difficult because, as long as financial pressures remain, that financial aid it will be important if you try to attract a broader section of the pie, and that in most of our schools that the financial aid is funded by the full pay families, and so that's why we were looking at the location and prevalence of the high income people, not just because that's the only people we want to serve, but because they're often the people who are underwriting our financial aid for those other families and our diversity within our schools. And also looking for alternative sources for financial aid, maybe with fundraising, and becoming tighter and more businesslike in our operations. That schools have varying degrees of operating like a business, and they say, well, we're not a business, we're an educational institution, and we're nonprofit, but also we're not for loss. That the school is not going to be able to meet payroll and its other obligations and expenses if it's not bringing in enough revenue to meet those costs. So this is an important element to be tight with our budgets. So finally, how do we deal with this challenge? How are shifts like these going to affect your target families? And you got to think also, it's not just the target families, but it's also the customers of your parents. If these kind of demographics are going to affect the people who are clients of your parents, and so they're going to have they may have fewer clients because they target the youth market, then that's going to affect their earning power as well. How is it going to affect your budget and enrollment forecasts? And finally, who at your school is really examining all of these long-range and strategic impacts of demographic shifts and other disruptors in the marketplace? And should you, as the head of admissions, have a seat at that table? And or do you need help from the outside to help get a handle on some of this, or present information to the broader school community and the board of trustees? And finally, I mean, it's difficult to be a prophet in your own land in dealing with some of these challenges, and so sometimes that's where having an outside help can be beneficial as well. So basically, that's our presentation. Thanks so much. Sorry, I went a few minutes over the time, but I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And I'm here for questions both now and also anyone who has interest in following up individually with a question. I'm more than happy to engage on a one-to-one basis as well.
Chad, thank you so much. We do actually have a few questions hanging in the wings here. Several of them concern the demographic information that you displayed, the maps and concentrations of wealth and children in the area surrounding your school. Could you tell us how you obtained that information, if you used a particular software package, or where that demographic information came from and how you analyzed it? Sure.
When we put together that information, that there were fewer tools available, and that I first commissioned a demographer, and then found that the demographer knew about general demographics, but also didn't necessarily have the detailed understanding of the school. So again, with myself as CFO and our Director of Admissions, Laurel, working closely with the demographer as a team effort, that we were able to kind of put that information together to present to our board. Since we put that information together, though, new resources have become available. That NAIS has a demographic center that is very helpful, and that not all, but some of that information can be easily gained by visiting the NAIS Demographic Center. NBOA has not available for online access, but we'll work with schools to also try to put together some of that data as well. And the U.S. Census has, is the base source for all of those, whether it's NAIS or NBOA or the independent demographer. And that's one of the things that I work with schools to help them with is better understanding the demographic makeup of their target markets.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Amy's asking, did you consider dropping the enrollment numbers to be more selective and pair that with cost cutting?
Well, that's certainly certainly an option that schools have, and that actually I don't think that in the case of Viewpoint that we had to sacrifice selectivity because we were able to expand the geographic market with things like targeted new bus routes and outreach, at least specifically for a middle and upper school. But that's certainly something that a school could consider, that to maintain selectivity, especially if it's a rather minimal drop of 5 or 10%, do we just have 5 or 10% fewer students and maintain the school that we are? But as the CFO in me understands that when you have fewer students and fewer and lower tuition income, you are also bringing in less resources to cover the expenses of the school. And sometimes those are direct expenses, like the teachers or assistants in the classroom, and maybe you can tighten up or drop a section. Maybe especially if you had 3 sections, you could drop and have 2 sections or whatever in a grade. But that also a portion of that restricted or revenue supports general operating, whether it's maintenance and facilities and overall administration and the admission budget. So the ability for the admissions office to have more resources to try and become more sophisticated with marketing could be undermined by having less resources flowing into the school as a whole, because you make a strategic decision to drop your target enrollment number. So there's no easy answer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chad. I think we have reached the end of the Q&A. I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and a special thank you to Chad for providing us with this insightful webinar. Just a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be made available on the webinar page in the professional development section on admission.org. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.